Welcome to our new Hebrews Ladies Bible class. I'm excited to start this new thing with you. I have been studying this for the past week. Well, I have studied Hebrews before, but I don't recall going quite this in depth on the background of the book. But I'm excited to share with you what I've been looking at. So, first of all, it's a very unique and fascinating book. The style is more homiletic in nature, with the exception of the closing remarks. And what I mean by homiletic is it sounds more like a sermon, like somebody wrote down someone else's words. It's not written in the style like a letter is, although the closing remarks are more like a letter. There's no name given as to its author except in the King James Version, and we'll talk more about that later. There's no specific audience. It's not addressed to a certain people, and it's included in the general epistles. The word Hebrews does not appear in the book, but it's obviously written to people knowledgeable in Jewish law and history. The book is extremely eloquent in the Greek language. I'm not a Greek scholar, but that's what I'm told. So about the author. Again, it's not explicitly stated in the text, and the author has been debated for centuries. In reading commentaries this past week, I ran across reference to a book called A Commentary to the Epistle to the Hebrews by Professor Stewart. I was able to find this at a website called archive.org, where they have a lot of old books. You can actually scroll through each page just like it's scanned in from a computer. But it's over 300 pages long. And Professor Stewart goes in long dissertations, I guess you could call it, about proofs, so-called proofs, about different authors. I just skimmed ahead to his results chapters, which are rather short compared to the lengthy previous chapters. So I just kind of read his conclusions, and his conclusions were very not conclusive about the author. Then I picked up Haley's Bible Handbook after reading all of that and just wondering how on earth am I going to present all of this stuff that's in my head, and I felt like this was a very good summary. So I'm going to read to you just what he has. It's also in the little notes. I'm going to send you a PDF of my notes. And I quoted it in there as well. So he says, in the King James Version, it is called in the title, the Epistle of Paul. And just my little side note, in my KJV, this is actually in there. In the American Revised Version, it is anonymous, because in the oldest manuscripts found since the King James translation was made, its author is not named. The English Church accepted its Pauline authorship from the beginning. Not until the 4th century did the Western Church accept the work as the work of Paul. Professor Stewart went in more in length on this, and there were some false teachers in Italy, which is what I'm assuming he's talking about, the Western Church in the area of Italy. And there were some false teachers that used Hebrews as a basis for their false teaching. And so the Western Church just threw out the book of Hebrews entirely. Eusebius considered Paul the author. Tertullian called it the Epistle of Barnabas. Clement of Alexandria thought that Paul wrote it in Hebrew and that Luke translated it into Greek. It is written in the most excellent Greek. Origen considered Paul as the probable author. Luther guessed Apollos, for which opinion there is no ancient evidence. Ramsey suggests Philip. Harnack and Rendell Harris suggest Prisca. That's Priscilla. Farrar Fenton thinks nobody but Paul could have written it, and that he wrote it originally in Hebrew and had it translated by one of his helpers into Greek. On the whole, the traditional view, held through the centuries and still widely held, is that Paul was the author. So let's look a little bit more specifically at each author, each proposed author. Was it Paul? The language is similar, but couldn't a student or close companion also copy similar language? And this is one man's suggestion on similar language used. So I have these references here and in the little notes page that I will send you, and you can look those up yourself. I personally did not see a strong connection in the language used, but maybe you will. So one of my questions I had during studying this was why someone who called himself the apostle to the Gentiles, why would he write it? And a possible answer might be that the writer was warning those that they might be slipping back into the old law, away from Christianity. And so you kind of see a caring heart. Whoever it is wants to see these Jewish Christians not slide back into that. There are several warnings, and one example is in chapter 3, verses 7 through 19. And of course, we'll look at that more in depth in our lessons. Now, Romans was written by Paul, but it says it was penned by Tertius. Could be likely this is the same situation. That's possible. However, Paul said that he has a sign in every epistle of his. He said, the salutation of Paul with my own hand, which is a sign in every epistle. So I write. This is in 2 Thessalonians 3:17. So if Paul wrote it, how was this salutation left off? Of course, he wrote that in one of his earlier letters. So if Hebrews was a later letter, maybe he stopped the practice of doing that. Who knows? Again, they're all conjectures and non-conclusive. But let's continue. So was it Barnabas? A lot of scholars feel that his encouragement comes out in the book of Hebrews. There's a vibe, if you will. That's my word for it. There's this encouragement vibe that comes out in the book of Hebrews. And he certainly was close enough to Paul to have used similar language. And he was a Levite, so he would have had the knowledge needed. Was it written by Luke? He was a companion of Paul. He certainly was with Paul during the writing of the letter to the Colossians. See Colossians 4:14. Tradition says he was a fine historian, that his gospel, the Gospel of Luke, and the book of Acts contain many accurate descriptions of biblical cities, as well as accurate geography. So a lot of archaeologists appreciate his records. So could he be so accurate concerning the Jewish law and the Jewish history, as we see in the book of Hebrews? Was it Apollos? He was eloquent in Greek. See Acts 18:24. Was it Priscilla? Of course, many feminists certainly want to believe this, but where's the proof? We have no proof of that I could find. Was it Timothy? Most KJV say at the end, written to the Hebrews from Italy by Timothy, including my own King James Version. But how is this possible? There are two conflicts. First of all, the KJV, if you remember, says at the beginning, calls it the epistle of Paul to the Hebrews. Well, how can it be both Paul and Timothy? Unless Timothy was his penman who wrote it down. But here's another problem. How is it the writer says he will see Timothy if the writer himself is Timothy? We read this in chapter 13, verse 23. Know that our brother Timothy has been set free, with whom I shall see you if he comes shortly. How can Timothy write about seeing Timothy? It just doesn't fit. That does not work. So here's what we do know. We do know that Hebrews is written in excellent Greek. It is written by someone well-versed in Jewish history, Levitical law, and also Christianity. Notice Hebrews 11:37. They, and you can revert back to verse 32. Verse 32 says, and what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets. So this is who they were talking about, including all the prophets. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. This reference to being sawn in two is very interesting. It's not included in the Bible, but it is in Jewish history. Jewish tradition tells us that Isaiah was put in a log and sawn in two. We can't find that in the Bible. This seems to be an indication that the writer or speaker of Hebrews was aware of this Jewish tradition, even outside of the Bible, so Jewish history. The writer is either in Italy or could be someone from there. This is from Hebrews 13:24, where he quotes, "Those of Italy greet you." I once heard a preacher from Alaska preaching in Tennessee. He could have said, "Those of the church in Alaska greet you," but we weren't in Alaska at the time he said that. We were in Tennessee. So this does not mean that the writer was in Italy at the time it was written. Ultimately, and I believe this is the most important point, ultimately the writer is God. The book of Hebrews has proven the test of time. It's included in our scriptures. And as we know, all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. And we read that, of course, in 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. That's our introduction to the book of Hebrews. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's beneficial to you. And I hope you'll join us for the rest of the book. Thanks. Bye.